Hey, Coach Val, how are you?
What's up, Dr. Tiff? It's another Tuesday.
It is, and we are here for another Tuesday Talks episode. It's always good to see your bright, smiling face here with me.
Absolutely. A moment of transparency, real quick. Like,
Sure.
I got these stripes on today. Is it doing like some optical illusion thing or something? Like,
It kind of looks like it's moving a little bit when you move. Like, I don't know, but I like it. As we were kind of chatting before we went live, I definitely want to go shopping with you to get up my top game. So one day we'll do that.
we're gonna do that. Yep.
Yeah, so we have a really great topic tonight, special education. And
Ooh.
it's a big topic, right? Because if special ed is the overarching like umbrella term, there are so many subtopics that can come forward from that. So
Yeah.
many.
To me, special ed is a whole school by itself. Like, I don't even it's so big it doesn't really fit inside of the regular structure of what school is supposed to be. I am
Yeah,
all for it. I'm just saying it's a lot.
it is. It's a lot. It's very layered and it's very nuanced for each district. So as we were kind of developing our notes for tonight, it was hard for me to not talk in state specific terms because you and I were here in Georgia. So I know Georgia, I know Virginia because I've worked there, I know Texas because I've worked there. But having worked in those different places, I realized how different the access points are for certain services. Now, the services are there in all states. It's mandated by federal law, but who you need to talk to get access to start the process or get just questions answered about special ed can be different from
Mhm.
state to state. But so yeah, it's a big topic. I know we got a lot of great notes to talk about and points to hit on tonight. So, we're gonna do our best to get through all of it, but if not, I feel like this is a great um part two type of topic.
Absolutely. It
Yeah.
is.
Yeah. So, what I wanted to start with tonight was, if you're watching, if you have any parents that might be thinking about special education services or already have their child receiving special education services, if you're a teacher who has kids in their classroom that are receiving special ed services, this is something that you definitely want to share
Mhm.
with others as well because we're going to be giving a lot of great information tonight. So go ahead and click that share button if you're watching us on YouTube. Um, Definitely share LinkedIn. You can repost, and then also Facebook Live. You can share there as well. So share the knowledge, spread the word about Tuesday Talks. So as we dive into special education, kind of that textbook definition of what special ed is it's a set of services that are mandated by federal law that provide students learning opportunities that maybe go against what is given to typical students. So if they have exceptional learning needs, that's one of the terms you'll hear as well. So it is a mandate by the federal government that services are provided to students. Now, in just regular everyday terms, special education is just services that help kids with disabilities to learn and make progress in school. And we'll dive into what some of those disability categories are as we keep talking. But just from your perspective in the school, Valerie, what has been some of your experience with explaining perhaps what special ed is to parents or just even understanding it yourself?
Yeah, I was gonna add, even just for me as a classroom teacher, understanding what special education is, and as always, when I share my experience, like understand it's just my experience. It does not mean that that's how it is everywhere across the nation or in the world. Um, but it it does tend to happen. So I like to start with what it's not. And
Mhm.
being in special education or receiving special education services is not a free ticket to passing your class, or a free ticket to getting your high school diploma and you don't have to do anything. I see a lot of situations where students who are put into special education, they have this sense of either you're going to give me everything that I
Mhm.
need, like, or you're going to tell me all the answers to things. Like, there's a lot of stuff that I've seen happen that I
Yeah.
feel like this is not the purpose of what special education is supposed to be for.
Yeah.
And it is not a solution for low grades either. So just because your child or your students' teachers are struggling in class, that doesn't automatically mean, oh, we need to get you checked for special education.
Yeah.
Um, as teachers, we're supposed to try different strategies and different interventions before any of that thought process takes place.
Yeah.
So I like to start there. These are the things that special education is not for.
Definitely. Yeah. We want to make sure that we're helping parents and teachers understand what it's not. So that was a great layout for what it's not. We're not just giving a free pass, a free ride. It definitely is going to still require your child to have challenging moments in the classroom as they're learning new material, and definitely going to require them to put forth effort as they work harder to learn the curriculum and certain topics in their grade level. So definitely good to address what it is not for sure. So what it is though, what special education services are is a different approach to presenting material to students. And that can look a lot of different ways. It could be in the classroom, so you could have the special education teacher come into the classroom to provide services. So, how it would look for you in middle school, if I'm the special ed teacher, I would come into your classroom if you're teaching math and y'all are doing, I don't even know what middle school math students are doing right now. You know my
We
feelings
are
about
doing solving systems of equations.
I just
Yes.
broke out into hives. But that what Valerie said, if y'all are working on that, I would come in the classroom as a special education teacher and I would either meet my student where they are. Maybe they're working on multiplying fractions. Maybe they're working on the whatever Valerie just said they're working on in class. And I just need to break it down and present it in a different way. Maybe I need to chunk the assignment and present it in smaller sections. Valerie's at the front of the classroom. We know a few weeks ago we talked about the pacing guide. So you're at the front of the classroom getting rolling with the pacing guide, and maybe my student who I'm servicing for special ed services can't keep up. So I might be repeating the directions that you've given, breaking them down, clarifying them. And then special education services can also look like pull-out services too, where kids come out of the classroom into a smaller group and work on same curriculum based material, but might be broken down at a different in a different way and presented in a different way as well. So I like that we kind of juxtapose what it is versus what it's not. So what are some of the sped services that you know and have experienced either personally or in your classroom?
So I've been exposed to basically two types. We, get this information as teachers at the beginning of the year from the inclusion teachers or the special education teachers. And I'll either get information about an IEP or a 504. And, education is notorious for its alphabet soup of acronyms, and if you're not in there, nobody knows what it means. I'm in there, and a lot of stuff I don't know what it means.
Yeah.
But those are the two things. And as a teacher, I've had a hard time distinguishing like why one student will get an IEP versus what would it take to get a 504. And I would love for you to kind of explain that to us and tell us like what's the difference and how do we know?
Yeah, so that's really good. Most people hear special education and they think IEP services, and that's very common. So, IEP services will require your child to be evaluated, will require them to be identified as having a learning disability, and then it would require some type of adverse academic impact, either in their grades, in the way they communicate, in their social emotional development. It has to have that adverse impact. So, a good example of a kiddo that might require an IEP would be a low achieving student with a very low IQ as well. Could also be a low achieving student with an average IQ. So you have this disparity between what their achievement level is and what their IQ is. So you're looking at that IQ number saying, well, they should be at performing academically at this level, but on these tests, they're achieving much lower. So you have that discrepancy. Some districts still follow a discrepancy model. Some are very criteria driven, and you have to have a certain score on these assessments in order to qualify. So, in the most basic form, an IEP requires that you have an identified disability and some type of adverse impact in the classroom. Now, the 504 plan, it still requires a child to have an identified disability, but it doesn't require that academic impact in the classroom. So, a great example of this would be a straight A student who their pediatrician has diagnosed them as having anxiety. So, they have the diagnosis of anxiety, and this is maybe causing them to not be able to just engage in their school day like a typically developing kiddo that doesn't have anxiety. And so now they have this 504 plan in place that's going to give them some accommodations in the classroom, that's going to give them some modifications to how they learn as well. And I see in the comments, Shantanette, thanks for joining us. Type 1 diabetes could also be a disability, a diagnosis that a child has been identified as having that requires them to have certain accommodations in the classroom as well. So that would require a 504 plan versus an IEP, where the child would need to have demonstrated some adverse academic impact in the classroom. So those are really the key differences between those two types of service plans. And that is kind of the gateway to getting your child the services that they need. Now, also, if your kid is not school age yet, so if you have a preschooler who is showing maybe some signs of delayed communication, or maybe their preschool or daycare teacher says that they're having difficulty with attention, retaining information, you can also look to your district for early intervention services. So these are services that kiddos can get before they even get to public school. And a lot of times parents don't know that. Were you
They
aware of that?
we don't. And so I have an eighth grader, and a 6-year-old, but particularly with the eighth grader, when he was about 2 years old, I noticed what I thought was some difficulty in his speech. I felt like he was stuttering on some level and didn't know a whole lot about it. I mentioned it to the director of the daycare that I sent him to, and the director kind of dismissed it and was just like, oh, well, these two, young kids aren't, fully developed with their speech and everything. And then it wasn't until he got in second grade. So from being 2 years old to
Wow.
second grade, now in second grade, we're getting IEP services for his stuttering, um, which from a parent perspective, like I had to come to grips with that, because I was like, I could have been helping him at 2 years old and we probably wouldn't have gotten this far with it, or he wouldn't have, it wouldn't have gotten so bad.
Mhm.
And so just getting information to parents, I feel like is one of the missing pieces that's happening in education. Like, parents are worried about the kids. The younger they are, the more focus they're putting on them. It's hard to seek other information from other places unless you just know. I wish I had known.
Yeah. And unfortunately, persistence is the key. Like, you went to that the person to say, hey, I'm concerned. And it's like, oh no, it's okay. Don't worry about it. If you're the parent and you have that gut feeling like something is off, be persistent. The
Yeah.
squeaky wheel gets the oil. That's like the old saying. Be
Yeah.
persistent. If that person is like, no, you should wait, talk to somebody else. The key words for if it's early intervention, if you're thinking about a 504 plan, if you're thinking about IEP, the key words to say to the school is, I want my child evaluated for services. Once you put that in writing, in an email, in a letter to the teacher, there is a timeline that starts that school district has to follow. And it varies from state to state. Most times you have 10 days to have a meeting to at least discuss what the parent wants through these evaluations. What are some of the challenges that they're seeing their child having and why they want the evaluation? And then the school and the parent then become a team to decide moving forward with testing, what areas are we assessing? Are we looking at specific disability categories? And so some of the types of disability categories that schools can identify um, are ADD, so attention deficit disorder, attention disorder with hyperactivity as well. You can have an intellectual disability if your child is on the autism spectrum. The early intervention services, they can not be meeting their developmental milestones. Talking with your pediatrician about that is always so important when you take your kid in for those well visits. Um, Talking to the doctor about it can also get the ball rolling as well so that they can refer you to outside services or to district services for your kiddo as well. So I saw a comment in the chat, how much time do they have to respond when you request to have your child evaluated? It does vary from district to district and state to state, but they have about 10 days. Sometimes it could be up to 20, but they have about 10 days to have a response and hold a meeting to address your concerns. It doesn't automatically mean that your child is going to get tested that week or that day, but it does mean that they have to respond to your request. So putting that in writing is something I always recommend because as parents, we sometimes we just have that intuitive feeling, right? Like
Mhm.
something just something's not right. Sometimes we rely on the teachers. Have you ever referred a kiddo for special education services to say, hey, I think that there are some learning differences here?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't want to say like all the time, like it's just all the time, but as a teacher, you're supposed to be aware because you're responsible for keeping up with the progress of how the kids are learning. And so you, by nature of the job, should really be one of the first ones to notice if there's any discrepancies in the child's progress. And so definitely, yeah, if I see something, um, I'll go to, of course, contact the parent and let them know what I'm seeing and what I'm thinking and what we're trying. But then beyond that, to the special education teacher, especially if I have one in the classroom. And then beyond that, the administrators.
Yeah. So if your child has a medical diagnosis, like we talked about diabetes earlier, it could be a vision issue that they might be having, it could be anxiety, high blood pressure, any type of medical diagnosis that your child has been given by their doctor. And you feel like that could have some type of impact on them in the classroom. Again, it doesn't have to be academic. It could just be they need more time to take tests. Maybe they need to sit at the front of the classroom to make sure they're attending. Maybe they need to be pulled aside in a small one-on-one type of setup in the classroom to just reinforce maybe some instructions you gave to the class as a whole. Any accommodation, there's too many to go over right here today, but any accommodation that you think your kid might need, even if there's not that academic impact, that 504 plan that we talked about earlier can be put in place to provide those accommodations and resources for the
I
child.
want to say, especially for testing, because
Mm,
we've talked about testing too here recently, and in that testing environment, the rules around testing are so strict about what can be done and what cannot be done in that environment. So if you have a student who has diabetes and they need to leave at some point during that test to take care of whatever they got to take care of, a 504 is put in place for that. So we can allow that to happen. Those are the types of things that we are talking about for accommodations.
Yeah, and I think sometimes parents just hear special education. I've talked to some parents who are like, I don't want that label put on my kid that they need special education. They're not going to put a disability on my baby. And I respect that perspective. I also want the kids to get what they need in the classroom, whether that be different academic instruction, whether that just be accommodations in the classroom. I want the kid to get whatever they need to succeed. Pinging back to what we talked about before with the pacing, guys, so much is put on these students throughout the school year as far as the amount of material that they need to learn, that if your child isn't keeping up, while it might not always mean that there's this adverse academic impact, it could mean that they need some accommodations just to be able to keep up with the pace and the manner in which the curriculum is presented. Because it really is like, here's what we're doing. We spend some days on it, and then we're moving on to the next thing, whether you're ready to move on to the next thing or not. And I know we talked about some of those early intervention services, so I just wanted to point out that public schools are required to provide some early intervention services. You can get home-based early intervention services where these special education teachers or clinicians like myself will come to your home to provide services for your kiddo. If they're younger than age 5 or haven't entered kindergarten yet and they are receiving going to Head Start or early Head Start programs, they also can have an IEP or a 504 plan there as well. And then speech therapists like myself, occupational therapists, physical therapists, special education teacher, that applied behavioral analysis therapists can all be there in that classroom providing the support before they even get to public school. And if there is an identified diagnosis or disability, I think it is always best to go ahead and have that IEP put in place before they even get into kindergarten. The people who have been working with your child before they get to kindergarten have a good grasp on what their skill set is. So they would know if they are behind in any area or maybe need accommodations based on the diagnosis that they have. So go ahead and work with them in that setting before they get to kindergarten to get those services established, because that IEP or the 504 plan comes with your child from Head Start, early intervention services into kindergarten. If you were to move from state to state, that IEP is a legal living document that follows them wherever they go. You can move from Georgia to Alaska. The IEP is a federal document. You just take that IEP and show it to the school in Alaska, and they have to implement those services until you all meet as
I
a
was
team.
shocked by the fact that it even follows you into college. Like, I think
Oh,
I only found that out like 2, 3 years ago.
yeah. So we're talking about all the way from age 3 up through college. I teach a grad course on Monday nights, and I have students that submit their letters of accommodations, and they are given extra time to take assessment, extra time to complete assignments, have permission to have their camera off, have permission to just respond via chat, not getting themselves off mute to answer questions. So it can definitely follow you all the way through college as well. And I see we have another comment in the chat. Early intervention is key. I cannot say that enough, how much I agree with that. Chantonette says she pushed for her daughter to get speech and OT before she started school, and now she no longer needs it. Like, that
There
just
you
gives
go.
me chills just even reading that, because a
Yeah.
lot of times, and you were even in that predicament yourself as an
Yep.
educator, Valerie, you try to get services for your kid before kindergarten, and then it was second grade before
Mhm.
those services were put into place. So another misconception, and this kind of goes to the point of early intervention being key, is that once you say, I want my child to be tested, you meet as a team and you determine, yes, we're going to test your child. The school is going to test them, academic testing, maybe speech, maybe the OT is going to test them as well. That process is not an overnight process. Most districts give between 45 and 65 days to get the testing done and hold a meeting to determine if the child qualifies for services.
It's
So
a long time. Like as the teacher, once that process gets kicked off and started, I mean, you could have a kid who by the time they're accepted and have an IEP written and everybody's ready to start giving accommodations, like half a year is over already.
Oh yeah, yeah. Because you have 45 to 65 days to test the kid, write your report, and hold a meeting to say, yes, they're eligible for special education services or no, they're not. So if we say yes at that meeting, from that day, we have an additional 30 days to write the IEP and get that in place. So if you are counting like school breaks for Thanksgiving, you got winter break, spring break, if you start this process after Thanksgiving break, things aren't going to be put into place until about January. And then you have the whole first year, half of the school year is gone already. So when you can get those services put in place before the school year even starts, that is the key. And little known fact, they will test your kid over the summer. A lot of schools don't like to publicize that because it's hard to get clinicians and practitioners to test these kids over the summer, but they will test your kids over the summer. But most times they'll try to have you wait until the school year starts just because just staffing purposes. And I know when we were developing our notes for the show, you were like, why does it take so long to get these kids tested? Well,
Really.
some of the psychologist measures can take, like, if a child can sit there without any breaks and just run through it, you're talking about 3 hours, sometimes 4 hours of testing. So if you need a kid, if you're testing a kid who needs a lot of breaks, like imagine. And that's not the only kid that you're testing as the psychologist either, or the speech therapist or the occupational therapist. You have a list of kids that you're testing in the district. And so it does take that long, just logistics wise. So it is needed. Nobody's just sitting in their office with their feet kicked up, just killing
And
time.
that's really good to know as a parent because while you're in the process and you don't know what the process is or how things are supposed to go, like sure they do tell you when you're in the meetings, but it's so much information. As a parent, you can't keep up with all of that stuff. So like just, to come to a space like this on Tuesday Talks and to hear this information. That's why you guys who are listening, like please share this with a parent, share this with other teachers that you know, because this is information that's vital to our students' success. We're in education because we want students to be successful. We want to see them grow and prosper and do the great things that they are put here to do. Special education is one of the helps that can be put in place for that. And so the more you know, the earlier you know, going back to early intervention is key, then the better it is for the kid.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. The earlier, the better. And just making sure that you understand that you as a parent have the authority because you are your child's best advocate to go to that school and keep talking to person after person until somebody hears you and says, okay, let's have a meeting. Let's bring the teacher in. Let's all meet
Mhm.
to discuss
Mhm.
what it is, what your concern is, and how we can address it. And sometimes it's not just moving right to testing. Sometimes they want to try some intervention beforehand. That's why I said at the top of the episode, like special education is this big umbrella and there are all these subcategories underneath it. It is very layered, very confusing. So I can see as a parent who doesn't have any experience in the space having trouble navigating the process because it can seem very delayed because things are moving
Mhm.
as fast. And then
Mhm.
it can seem very confusing because you might have contradictory information being provided and presented to you. So I know we like to give tips and actionable strategies for parents. And like Shantanette said, trust your gut, go with your intuition. You know your child. If you think something's wrong, mention it to the pediatrician, talk to their daycare teacher, talk to their school teacher, get someone to hear you and get that meeting held so you can get the ball rolling. And that
Mhm.
is a great way to end our episode for tonight is just if you are living in Georgia or other places, you can just simply go into Google and type in special education services in my district or early intervention services in my district. And those two terms will get you to some resources in your area because special education is very specific to where people live. So you want to make sure that I can tell you what happens here in the county where I live. That could be very different from for the county where you live. So just use those search terms to look for services in your district. And I know we have so much more planned to talk about tonight. So we're going to have to do a part two because I really, really want to get into some of the indicators that would have a parent kind of feel like, okay, yeah, my kid might need some services. I need to talk to somebody about that. Also, just discussing some of those the learning gaps that happen, the teacher's perspective on special education services, and how they feel. And we'll get your perspective on this, Val. Like, how
Yeah.
comfortable are you saying, hey, I think there's something going on, especially at the middle school level? You would expect for something to have been identified before then, but sometimes not. Sometimes not.
Yep. What got missed? Yep.
Yeah, for many, many years, I've seen it happen. So we are definitely going to continue this talk next week as well to dive a little bit deeper into special education services. Remember, if you're watching live or the replay, use those Google search terms, special education services in my district, or special education, early intervention services, I'm sorry, in my district, and get the resources for your kid that they need and set them up for success. So with that,
Absolutely.
yeah, we will see you
All right.
all next week. Please join us every Tuesday. What time, Val?
9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
9 p.m. That's right. So we'll see you next week live right here on Facebook, LinkedIn, and on YouTube. Have a good night.
Thanks, guys. Bye.